Labor unions started to form in the 1800s to address workers' concerns for lower wages, long hours, and dangerous working conditions. During 1880 to 1900, there were over 23,000 labor strikes across the U.S. in the railroad, mining, and other industries. Most of these occurred throughout the industrial regions in the Northeast. Unfortunately, many strikes turned violent. In the anthracite coal mines of Pennsylvania, a massive strike arose protesting the unfair wages for the workers. Conflict between the mine workers and the operators created an economic tension in 1902 when the miners went on strike. Theodore Roosevelt's intervention in the strike led to a historical compromise between labor and business interests, which ultimately led to the increase in power of labor unions and focused attention on workers' rights. Unlike this strike, most strikes in the 1800s led with violence and did not ensure reform for the union. Many of these strikes forced industry operators to negotiate increases in common necessities amongst the workers. One major labor dispute occurring in Chicago on May 1886 took a drastic turn when police fired into a crowd of strikers and killed 4 people. Over 350,000 workers protested for better wages and demanded for shorter work hours. The following day, workers met at Chicago's Haymarket Square to protest the shootings and were met with 200 police officers. One of the workers threw a bomb into the police officers, killing 4 and injuring 40. 8 people were accused of murder and sentenced to death. This is an example of one of the thousands of violent strikes happening in the U.S. at this time. In the 20th century, coal was one of the most important materials to the nation's economy. It powered railroads, it fueled the country's factories, and most importantly, it provided heating for houses. In 1902, at the anthracite coal mines in Pennsylvania, miners were furious with the lower wages and long working hours. The working conditions were cruel and unfair. It was cold, dusty, and it had dangerous air. American labor leader wrote, "Conditions in the anthracite coal mines were almost unspeakably bad. The evils of the company's store system were rampant. They demanded for a change or else they threatened to go on strike. This strike was notable for the lack of violence, unlike many of the other strikes happening across the U.S. John Mitchell once said, "We are conducting this struggle without malice and without bitterness. We ask not for favors, but for justice." The mine operators argued that they weren't getting enough revenue for the company and could not increase the wages. In response, the leader of the United Mine Workers of America, John Mitchell, and 150 other thousand workers officially went on strike on May 12th of 1902. Even though they had thousands of people on their side of the strike, they knew they would have powerful companies rivaling them. This will be the fiercest struggle in what we have yet engaged. It will be a fight to the end. The strike lasted for several months and left a shortage of coal for Pennsylvania. This led to a massive skyrocket for the price of coal. The coal price exploded to $20 per ton, which is equivalent to $12.93 per gallon of gas today. At this point, only the richest could afford coal. Roosevelt saw this as a problem, but initially he thought he had no power to intervene. There was no established procedure written in the Constitution dedicated to labor disputes. Labor laws were eventually established in the 1930s, but at the time, there were none. Roosevelt said it in anything related to the 1902 strike, and thought it was something to be settled amongst the workers and the owners. Theodore Roosevelt said, "As long as I avoid interfering, I did so." At first, mine operators insisted to bring in the military to end the strike. Instead, Roosevelt decided to bring the military to occupy the mines, not to end the strike, but rather to protect it from anyone coming to steal coal from the mines. Time was running out, and people in Pennsylvania were getting nervous for the winter. Roosevelt finally decided it was time to step into the issue. He realized it wouldn't just affect Pennsylvania's economy, but the nation as a whole. Roosevelt said, "It is not too much to say that the situation which confronted Pennsylvania New York, and New England, and to a less degree of the states of the Midwest in October 1902, was quite as serious as they have been threatened by an invasion of a hostile army of overwhelming force. The destabilization of the economy not only left people without coal for heating, but slowed down railroad stations and large businesses were losing money. This was becoming a big problem for everyone, and to settle the issue on October 1st, Theodore Roosevelt invited the UMWA leaders and the mine operators to meet at the White House to discuss the issue. Roosevelt wrote a telegram to Mitchell saying, "I should like to see you on Friday, next October 3rd at 11 o'clock a.m. here in Washington in regard to the failure of the coal supply, which has become a matter of vital concern to the whole nation." Many people and important figures of the UMWA met with the mine operators at the White House on October 3rd to come up with a compromise. This meeting was known as the Anthracite Coal Strike Commission. The miners thought the strike was a waste of time and tried to convince Roosevelt to use the power of the government to end the strike. The operators rejected the president's effort to fix the problem and refused to negotiate with Mitchell. On this day, nothing was gained from the commission, and Roosevelt saw it as a fail. He said, "Well, I tried and failed, and I feel downhearted over the result." A few weeks after, the commission took place again in late October and dragged on into the late months of 1902 and the early months of 1903. Eventually, on April 1st, 1903, there was a compromise between the workers and the miners that provided a 10% increase in wages and a 1-hour decrease in work hours. This strike not only benefited the miners, but it inspired other workers in later years to also strike. Although the mine operators still did not recognize the union, Mitchell saw it as a win because the Board of Conciliation was created to have representatives on both sides. This board allowed workers to submit complaints they had about the workplace. The anthracite coal strike had important consequences for the UMWA. The strike received a lot of attention from the media, which increased the sympathy of the general public for the miners. It also showed that miners and operators could peacefully negotiate with a third party. The commissioner reported a more conciliatory disposition in the operators and their relations towards one another would be a better and more lasting work than which any other mere rulings, however wise or just, may accomplish. This set a precedent for the official recognition of the UMWA in future strikes. President Roosevelt's intervention in the strike showed that the public had the right to have a say in labor issues when it affected them, and to say that the public couldn't help decide what to do with the problem. When a national interest is at stake, there is now a precedent for the third party to step in. The compromise between labor and business in the Anthracite Coal Commission resolved the conflict between the workers and the operators in the coal mines of Pennsylvania, overall giving some power to the labor unions and increasing the involvement of a third party in disputes that affect public interest. Ultimately, it helped human rights by allowing the workers to have a voice by granting them the Board of Conciliation. This strike gave a spark to the labor movement and showed the public that strikes can also be peaceful and effective. Still a 99 stuck in some small town news reminds us of the deep mine fire, but how deep our family